Oh, what a day! What a lovely day!
Welcome to a Flat Earth Debate special edition on the Mandela effect. I'm your host Nathan Oakley, and if you're new to the channel or you've not done so already, then be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification icon to keep up to date with the Flat Earth Debate. If you'd like to support the channel, there is a super chat that runs alongside each of the shows while they're live, and there's also a PayPal, Patreon and crypto link in the info box below the video. Now, I am joined by Bible Literalist, otherwise known as Paula. Am I okay to call you Paula on this broadcast?
That's fine, thank you.
We're joined by Paula. So subscribe today. I will, once this show is done, put a comment in the info box below that says, here's Paula's channel, go and subscribe for excellent content regarding, as the name suggests, the Bible, obviously Bible Literalist, and various other side topics like Flat Earth and, in this instance, the Mandela effect. So I'll just do a brief introduction. I'll take you off screen so you're not sat listening as I give it. But so a couple of days, maybe a week ago, Paula did, I don't know if it is an impromptu stream, but a stream on the Mandela effect. And it's kind of a pet peeve of mine. It's a subject I've covered in a few videos. I've even had guests on and discussed it in various aspects. One was allegedly Dave. And unfortunately for him, after him expressing his information on it, I went out and debunked his claim, which is a bit rude because he was a guest. But there we go. It's just one of those things. Now, as I say, Paula did this broadcast, and obviously a lot of the things that she was covering were linked to Mandela effects that are detailed in the Bible, but not just those particular Mandela effects. But the way, whys and wherefores of how people come to these incorrect conclusions, these false memories, was laid out in such an exceptional way that I wanted to have Paula on my own show, so that hopefully we can discuss the subject and perhaps pass some of this very useful information on to anybody who's watching. So I don't really know where to start because I haven't got a formal plan together, but welcome to the show. Good to have you, Paula.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It is a big deal because, like as I was putting out in the video, it's an attack on any appeal to empirical evidence or fact or objectivity, and that's why it's a big deal. So
why did you decide that you were going to cover it in the first place? Is it mainly just because of the people presumably using it to discredit the Bible? Was that your lead into it?
Yeah, mostly. Everything is always in a context of, there's specifically the Bible, but there's also, because that's the focus of my channel, there's also general principles of how we know anything we know, or epistemology. This is, the study of how you know what you know. And I always try to look for the underlying basis of something. And so since this comes up a lot, almost to a level of a religion, just observing it to be so, I thought it was an important topic to do. So that's why I did that. As I said in my video, it seems to come up about once a year. I've done 2 years in the past, but it seems to be a recurring issue. And again, the issue is not, somebody's attacking my Bible, as a lot of people will say, just a knee-jerk reaction because everything I possibly think is always about the Bible all the time, apparently. But it is a big deal, for my channel. Of course, that's what I'm going to focus on. But it doesn't just stop there, is the point. It is like I said, an attack upon objective evidence and how anything can be known, or whether it should be known. In your your live stream this morning, there was something on the screen about that, where people are saying, I forget the exact terminology, that not even science can know anything, something to that effect. You can fill me on what the exact wording was, but it's the same problem, really.
Sure. I mean, that example is them saying science doesn't prove things, which it absolutely does. But I mean, just for an outline to anybody who might be unfortunately new to this subject. So the Mandela effect gets its namesake from Nelson Mandela being presumed to have died in jail back in the 80s. Now, my introduction to this was as somebody who was well aware that Nelson Mandela was alive and well, and there was Free Mandela t-shirts that were, made illegal at the time, and that was on our news. But for the people in America, it wasn't necessarily the case, and there was an assumption, a false memory, if you will, that he died in jail. So when people find out that he didn't die in jail, they assume that their memory's been erased, or a timeline has changed, or any number of all sorts of crazy explanations for why they have the idea or the notion that Nelson Mandela died in jail when in fact he didn't. So that's a brief outline for the namesake of the Mandela effect. So there we go. Hopefully that's useful.
Yeah, I tend to forget that sometime, that everybody doesn't know what that is. But you mentioned timelines, and that was what it was called before it was called the Mandela effect. People used to say, well, in my timeline, Billy Graham died several years ago, or before he actually died, or anything like that, or any number of things in my timeline, this, in my timeline, that. And then it became Mandela effect because I guess Mandela is I can't say more famous than people like Billy Graham or John F. Kennedy or anybody like that, but for some reason that caught on. And the thing is that alternate timelines is as speculative as a magical effect. I can't think of a better word for Mandela than a magical effect, because it's an effect and nobody says what the cause is. Nobody tries to say what is making this happen or who's making it happen, but there's a lot of assumptions. But the alternate timeline idea is more of a trying to be quote unquote scientific, because of the idea of multiverses and things like that. So when people talk about multiple timelines, that sounds more sciencey, I guess. Whereas Mandela is more of a, again, for lack of a better term, a conspiracy angle, that there are nefarious forces that are able to not only change the facts of history, whatever facts of history are by Mandela definitions, but also to change the evidence upon which you might investigate it. And that's why it's an attack on fact and empiricism, because if the evidence itself can change, that is to say, printed documents, things etched in stone even, things that are very ancient that everyone has known about, because under the umbrella that everything in history is a lie and we're just going to burn all the books, burn all the history, and who benefits from that? Well, the powers that be. Another term is from the Bible. It means the powers in place, and it has a couple of layers of meanings. But the point is that allegedly these dark forces are changing words on pages, not just movie lines or anything like that. It's everything, and including the Bible. The Bible is just one part of that.
Well,
but
if I just expand on one thing you said, because it gave a good clarity when you said etched in stone. So just for the audience's benefit, neither myself or Paula are denying the fact that the media can change things, and they do, and they have frequently. That's a given. But when Paula said etched in stone, that is to imply that you've got, let's say, the Georgia Guidestones, where you've got an actual piece of text etched into it, hammered in with a chisel, that text has physically changed and is now stating something completely different to what it did before, as opposed to a new newspaper coming out that changes the narrative that was once a different narrative. That's completely different. So in some ways, there's going to be people who at this stage, had I not said this, would say, no, Mandela effect is standard media practice. And in that context, I would agree, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about where someone says, no, on the stone, it said Berenstain, and now the stone has been re-etched, filed down, and it now says Berenstein. That's the difference that we're talking about, as opposed to standard media narrative changes, which we don't disagree with. I'm sure you'll agree. I'm saying that for you, Paula. Sorry.
Right. No, not at all. And the thing is that there are mysteries in life that we're not going to solve. Like, I'm sure everybody's seen, it was, I don't know how many years ago, a side-by-side list of a bunch of little facts about JFK and a bunch of little facts about Abraham Lincoln, and all the uncanny parallels and mirror images, And you wonder how that happens. And I think I mentioned this in my video, that there are, if anything, these things like that prove that life is mysterious in many ways, and there are things going on behind the scenes that we can't explain. So nobody denies that there are weird happenings. That's always been a thing. And the only difference now is that there is I don't want to call it a body of knowledge, but a movement to dismiss anything and everything that is hard evidence in favor of personal memories, which I call reverse gaslighting. Because in gaslighting, of course, that named after the movie Gaslight, where the victim in the movie was put next to a gaslight and basically told that she can't trust her memories, and she was being driven insane that way. As if she can't trust her own memories, even though they were true. So when we're saying something about Mandela effect, as the one article I had referenced to my video pointed out, we're not saying that memories are necessarily false. We're saying that they're based upon something which may or may not be true, may be based on something mistaken, as I've mentioned before about song lyrics, and you mentioned about media and movies or anything else. There are a Christmas gift I gave to somebody one year was a bunch of little coasters with misunderstood song lyrics, like cream cheese are made of these or something like that instead of sweet dreams, and things that people hear and they perpetuate, and everybody thinks it's the same thing, that this is how the lyrics actually were, and you find out they weren't. Well, is that Mandela effect, or is it just people misheard something and it spread? And the article I've mentioned that claims to be the first Mandela effect website took a clinical look at it. I felt a very balanced look at it, and said that this sort of thing of are memories trustworthy or not is a small subset of the study of all memory, because memory is not as cut and dried as we would like to think. For example, when I have a very early memory of my siblings and I throwing a cat over a balcony to see if it would land on its feet, not out of meanness, but just curiosity, and kids not thinking about what this would, frighten the cat or anything. And I can see it plain as day as any other memory. As far as I could tell, it was my memory. But as I got older, I realized, wait a minute, I wasn't even born yet. I could not have been there when this happened. But when you're a little kid and somebody tells you something they did, you visualize it, and it becomes your memory, as if you were there. And I'm not saying this explains every Mandela effect phenomenon, but I'm saying that it is something to consider as a possibility in many of these cases, just like the misheard song lyrics.
Yeah, my favourite example of this, whether it's false memories, is probably the Star Wars "No, I am your father" versus "Luke, I am your father." Well, many a parody will get the general gist of that subplot from that movie by paraphrasing the actual quote and saying, "Luke, I am your father," to make it explicitly clear in a parody or an example or on a t-shirt or whatever. And that may be the thing that permeates the public far more than the narrative that was actually kept very close to the chest by the producers, even from the people making the film. That was a plot twist that they didn't want to have leaked. So it was kept very much under wraps. So when people finally got to hear it, they heard it once in a cinema and went out and told everyone about it, but they obviously got the quote wrong. And it gets permeated and permeated and permeated. It doesn't mean the film is incorrect or has been changed. It's simply your memory of what was talked about as opposed to your memory of the actual quote. So "No, I am your father," as opposed to "Luke, I am your father," is simply a false memory.
And the Star Wars is a good example, because I know I saw the originals when they were new, and we had early VHS tapes, and they, Lucas especially, would keep re-releasing in different packages the same original 3 movies, and every time something would change. And it isn't as though it was a Mandela effect magical thing. It was that he had, when they record a movie, they are doing multiple takes. And sometimes you would have one, sometimes you would have another, and each re-release, something would be different. To market, to make more money, to make people buy the set, not just because it's in a special set, but because he actually material changed things. One was there's this thing, an audio clip called, it has a name called the Wilhelm scream.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you're familiar with that. And when in that scene where Luke says, that, that's impossible, that's not true, that's impossible. And then he falls, he lets go and lets himself fall. And in the original, he did not scream. There was no sound but the music. Then in a remake, they put in the Wilhelm scream. Then in another remake, they took it back out. And this is just, at the time, I like I said, I saw the original, I've seen all the remakes, and it was just, Lucas marketing, changing, doing something different every time so he could sell the same movie over and over and over again to the diehard fans who would buy every single one of them. And so the thing is that, no, I'm not saying there's no such thing as an unexplained, phenomenon of something being very uncanny, or, we're absolutely sure of our memories. I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but I'm saying until somebody comes up with a way to prove the unprovable, I'm not going to accept it, because, and it's not having to do with, being afraid somebody's going to disprove the Bible, as I've been accused by some proponents of Mandela effect. The point is that it's an attack on evidence, because if the evidence changes, you can never prove it, you can never disprove it, it's unfalsifiable, it's just a belief, and that's all it is, because you can't appeal to evidence. It's the same thing whether it's Mandela or erasing history. The phrase, history has been written by the victors. Well, victors change. One country defeats another, then later that country rises up and defeats the first one, and they rewrite history every time. Who are you going to believe? So instead of dumping all of history and burning all the books, and to use a worn out phrase, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, you need to investigate it. Well, how can you do that if you don't have a set, consistent application of a way to find out truth from error, to investigate evidence, to do experiments, whatever you have to do to compare documents? And that's why it isn't just a Mandela effect, but things like that, that burn books and throw away history, Mandela effect, whatever they are, what they have in common is an attack upon empiricism. And the point is that since it can't be proven, then no one can say what the words on the page originally were, what the etching in the stone originally was, because there's no such thing as evidence anymore.
Right.
So, yeah, it becomes a belief system, and it can never be anything more by its own definition.
Well, it also becomes self-justifying. So, as we're on Star Wars, I'll give a different example where it's akin to your example with text changing, because there's a nice chronology with your example. So with Star Wars, like you say, he's made chronological changes as the films have been re-released, and people have made example of C-3PO's silver leg, and they say, that's a change. I've seen the movie, I had the movie, I watched it hundreds of times, he definitely never had a silver leg. Now, that was actually the Dave Murphy example when I interviewed him, and unbeknownst to him, my second job was working in a very, very high-end hi-fi shop, and at the time Laserdiscs were very popular, and you could get the most sought-after box set was the original release, the CAV Criterion Edition, with no edits made, exactly as it was, and in sublime quality, as good as you could get at the time. And we sold line doublers and scalers and massive plasma televisions that were, by today's comparison, tiny, but £15,000 to £20,000 for these things, working with line doublers. And the whole point of this was to get people who had watched the movie 100 times and believed they knew it inside out and back to front to go into our little demonstration room and then go, is his leg silver? Not that was this specific example, but that kind of thing, for you to notice a detail in the film that you just didn't notice on your VHS copy. Or your rubbish CRT TV that wasn't anything by comparison to the high-end equipment that we had. So that was my job, to show people with original source material, like going back in time through the text and checking with the originals rather than with the re-releases and the rewrites, and then saying, it says in the rewrite this, therefore that's how I remember it when it was as a kid being different, therefore Mandela effect. It's like, well, no, there's normally a level of research that you can do to find out if your assumption is a false memory or if that's actually the case. And in this instance, well, for most people, it's a false memory based on pure resolution. The quality of what you were watching wasn't good enough to show up those details, so you don't remember those details because for you, those details weren't there. And there's another one at the other end of the scale with Jaws. This was my most recent and last. As far as I'm concerned, I've debunked them all. I'm sure periodically new ones will come up, but for me, I'd gone through a hell of a long list of them with the TVs and the songs and all this garbage. And the last one was Jaws, the girl with the teeth with the wire braces, and I couldn't figure it out. I was like, I just can't figure that one out. I don't know how to figure it out until Ranty brought it up and just happened to play a YouTube clip where someone had taken their VHS copy of the movie and put it onto YouTube, and he paused it when she smiles, and lo and behold, the interlaced frame rate made it look like she'd got braces on. I could you not? I was like absolutely overcome. I'm like, brilliant. So essentially, the resolution of a VHS copy of this or a broadcast TV copy that's been recorded onto cassette is going to make it look like she's got braces. That's the explanation. Now, until that point, I didn't have an explanation, and I'd given up on research because it had just frustrated me so much. But essentially, not necessarily a false memory, just a false impression that you'd been given by way of low-resolution VHS cassettes back in the 80s, or TV broadcasts, low-resolution on CRT TVs. But typically, these changes, these alterations and false memories that people will swear by, are just down to their own lack of research and believing their own false memory, which is patchy at best.
Yeah, and the thing is that this is what I focused on in my video on the Bible part, is that when people say that the Bible's been changed, they haven't done adequate research. They never seem to look up how many times a certain word is in the Bible, like bottle or matrix or suburbs even. We all think that these are more modern words when they're not. They're in dictionaries from just before the King James was made. And so this effect, I never hear the proponents of it, especially regarding the Bible, even mentioning that it also changed in the dictionaries before the King James was written. So this effect becomes an absurdity on that scale when you realize what the scale is, but most people don't check. They don't know what the scale is. They don't know how many other things had to change to go along with that. And the point is that we've been talking about movies and a few celebrities and in the Bible, very minor details. They don't say that George Washington was not the first president of the United States. They don't say that Jesus didn't rise from the dead, although people don't believe that, but I'm just saying the Bible, had been changed to say something else. They don't change anything terribly significant. Why is that? I've heard the excuse that, well, they're just practicing, they're conditioning us, but that is an ad hoc explanation. And again, once you take away empirical evidence, then you can't even argue for it plus or minus. Because what would you use as evidence? Just memory alone? Memory alone has never been valid evidence by itself, especially just by one person. That's why in a court of law, when you can't see the crime that happened, you have to reconstruct it. You get many witnesses and you keep cross-examining them. And when people have different memories of something, you can't just ask the people who have the same memory. You have to ask people with different memories. You have to have hostile witnesses. And that happens whether it's the Bible or anything else.
Right, exactly. So I think you've summarized this already, but I think the main purpose of the Mandela effect, if there's going to be a they that you've just alluded to, which we might come back to, if there is a they, the only purpose is to serve an impression that reality is not fixed, and that only serves our masters, if you will. It doesn't serve any practical purpose for us other than a mere folly or an amusement. If you've got a memory wrong, to be proven wrong is, some people enjoy that, it's fun. But if you're going to sort of imply any nefarious intent, then the only one that would have a motive for this were people that were alluded to right at the start by me, the media. In other words, if you've got a standard practice where you can change a narrative and you leave people with the impression that you potentially could be in a different universe, a parallel universe tomorrow with a completely different outcome from something that has happened, then it's much easier to change narratives for those people if people are of the general mindset that the Mandela effect is a real effect and that things are actually changing and the etched in stone words can actually be changed when you move to a different parallel dimension. Absurd, but useful for those who control us.
Exactly. And that's when you get into why would they lie. There's always, you can speculate on a motivation. Of course, I'm always leery of that sort of thing because people are all the time on the internet assuming what other people's motives are. But to speculate, at least I'm saying that's what this is, on this sort of thing where you either, put memory above evidence or say that history is all a lie, and so that people can never trust any evidence. What you're doing is taking away the thing that is stopping or delaying the powers that be from reaching their goal, which is total domination of the world, not just of its activities, but of the thoughts of people. That is to say, they don't want freedom of conscience. They don't want anyone to have an errant thought. That's just, it's 1984 on steroids. That's what they want. I've read quotes that this is what they want. They want to be gods. They want to be so different from us in every possible way that we can't possibly revolt any more than the ants at a picnic could, take the picnic people hostage and take their food away. So the motivation, if I were to venture a guess, would be that we have to have people give up on proof and evidence because that's what they're using against us to expose our evil deeds. They're using evidence. And this is why, in general, on the political spectrum, especially, that the left, what is called the left, tends to say, well, everything is relative, nothing's knowable, it's all your own personal truth. That side tends to be politically left and having that kind of a mindset. I've just an observation. But the point is that once you take that away, you can't ever indict anyone for the evil things they've done because they'll say, hey, I don't have that memory of, murdering my neighbor and taking their car. I don't have that memory of, stealing, candy from the candy store. And you would have no choice at that point but to just go by whoever has the dominant power, and they will say what the past was. That's exactly what Orwell was going for in his novel 1984, was that, even, the most obvious, blatant, they didn't even try to hide it when the protagonist, Winston, for example, his job was to erase people from history, to airbrush out people from photographs and take the words out of the documents and store the documents, and couldn't even trust his own memories at the end, even though his memories were true and the narrative was false. But the point is that when evidence is that malleable, when it is subjective, when it depends on a person's whims, basically, then what are we arguing about? Why is it a thing? Why are people upset if you don't believe their version of the past? Why do people care if the Bible's been changed when they don't believe the Bible anyway? This is a real head scratcher for me. But especially for the King James onlyists, not all of them believe the Mandela effect, to be sure, but there are some who do, which is the most nonsensical thing I can think of, because they believe that they have the pristine, perfect Word of God, unaltered. All the others are pretenders and lies and from the devil, and yet they believe it has been changed by evil forces. I don't know how those two thoughts can exist in the same mind, but it happens. That's all I can say, is that it happens. And again, this whole Mandela effect and everything related to it is an attack on evidence. And once you attack evidence, you have nothing but beliefs and opinions. And why bother with it at that point?
The thing is, it's a tertiary dismissal of evidence as opposed to the inclination to go out and investigate whether or not your false memory is true or not. So it's back to your comparison with the memory hole. For Winston, when something goes down the memory hole, essentially that's depicting the public not having any conception of it anymore. It's been erased from history, but he still knows. So it's the kind of, has he got a false memory, or is it the false narrative that's false? Well, that's back to your media comparison. That's standard practice. If you want to call that the Mandela effect, I'll back you 100% and say, yeah. They do change the narratives. That's standard practice. But we're talking about the idea where in a science context, they'll say science doesn't prove something. Science isn't going to give you an established cause and effect. It's just open to interpretation. It adds to the body of evidence, and we can change it any time we like. Well, if that's the pseudoscience punted narrative by the people who are giving you just so stories about how your world works and how the world is operating, or how any media event is taking place, it's very useful for you to have the general impression that not only is it the case that potentially the media might change something, it's real because we're just in a different timeline now. The life we led in a different timeline has been erased, and all I'm left with is the fading memory of that thing that once was. Now, there's a whole load of problems with that, because if the timeline had changed and you were in a parallel universe, there'd be no transposition from one to the next. You wouldn't be left with any fading memories from some old parallel universe that you were in. That's absurd. So that's got a whole load of flimsy holes in it. And again, it just leaves you with the overriding impression that the people who would want to put this kind of crap into our consciousness are the people who want you to believe a change is real when it isn't. Well, who are the people making the changes? Well, we don't need to answer that. We've said it many times on this show. But they're the ones that are presumably, I say presumably because I don't want to get a load of crap in the comments, the ones that have put this bullshit idea of a Mandela effect and then perpetuated it over and over again, so that if they do change things, we go, oh no, it's okay, it's perfectly acceptable, that was just a false memory, it wasn't really the way I remember it, and you move on with your day without giving it any more consideration than needs be. Now, the contrast to that is actually researching stuff, checking out, well, am I right about that? Second guessing yourself rather than just immediately buying into your own false memory and saying dogged, determined, yeah, that's right, I'm right, I remember, my memory's flawless. No, your memory might be of, in the case of Luke, I am your father, the talk and the discussion and the prints and the t-shirts as opposed to the movie quote itself. Well, that is solved by research, and I think the general dumbing down of TV, which I don't watch anymore, the whole point of that is to get you to be more lazy, to stop you from wanting to actually research, and then you can be left with the impression that, oh yeah, it's okay, things just do change. We live in a parallel universe now.
Yeah, it's the ancient religious, actually, idea that truth is what's true for you, that there is no objectivity, no standard, and anything you want to be true can be true. And that's what you're left with once you abandon objectivity and research and having a consistent method of determining true from false that doesn't depend on memory. And there's a reason that people started writing things down in the first place and etching them in stone. Not that writings can't be scratched out, but that because memory can be lost or altered, and people knew this from ancient times, they started writing things down. If memory were superior to physical evidence, then who would have bothered with that? And again, why would anyone care to do research? We just get spoon-fed from the powers that be what they think is true today, and anyone who disagrees is an idiot or a rebel and needs to be silenced. And then tomorrow the narrative will change. It's back to 1984, and you just go on, like you said, go on with your day and never think about what the possibility that something might be objectively true, and it doesn't depend on who believes it or not. So this is why this is an important issue, because without objectivity, without empiricism, without evidence, and a consistent application of it, such as, for example, the scientific method or textual criticism when we're talking about documents, without that, when you throw it all away, you are left with nothing but beliefs. And if that's what they are, then why fight about it? Why do people get upset if you don't believe Mandela effect? Why do they get upset if you call them out on calling something science and they don't use the scientific method?
I think
Your whole channel, my whole channel is all about evidence, and without that's why they would attack it. You know what I'm saying?
I think people don't like being wrong. So in many instances, they have this idea, and again, back to the I've watched it 100 times answer. No one wants to be proven wrong. If you've got an idea in your mind and you're absolutely certain it's correct, you don't want to have to do any more research because you don't want to believe your memory is going to betray you. No one likes that. No one wants to be proven wrong. And so stubbornness, maybe. I don't know why people would disagree and argue with you when it comes to why don't you believe my belief or why don't you believe my false memory in this regard. And then, I know exactly, I'll plug your channel again. In your case, it's because, well, I've done a lot of bloody research on it. I've spent a considerable amount of time checking my facts. So when I say a fact, it's not purely based on my memory. It's based on what I've researched, documented, and can show here now to back what I claim. And the same is true with empirical scientific evidence. No, it's not agree, disagree. It's not about an addition to a body of evidence. It's an empirical, scientifically valid experiment that backed the presumed cause of my effect as the actual cause. Proven. That's not up for debate. That's not agree, disagree. And it's the same when you can back your claim in terms of historic research. You go, well, no, I'm basing what I'm stating on my historic evidence. Now, these are very different standards. I'll clarify that straight away. Historic and scientific evidence are very, very different standards. But they are standards nonetheless, and they absolutely aren't your memory and how well you think you remember something. So those aren't decent standards of evidence. I'm just going to read out a couple of quick shout-outs if that's okay. So shout out to Chow Young Cat for the super chat. Very much appreciated. A round of applause. Thank you very much. Bad Puppet says, cheers to the show. And then a bicep. Thank you very much for the super chat. SX0 says, I love this episode. I pretty much despise the Mandela effect, actually, SX0. So yeah, it was wonderful when Paula brought up the 1980 brought up Winston, because basically that to me is like a lead that I don't have to give my guess. So I'm smiling here, sitting thinking, yeah, exactly. It's about 1984 and how they portray it. But anyway, shout out to MC Universe Sacred Truth Seeker, who says, the level of technology is not what we've been told. We created consciousness machines, and in ancient times, there's an advanced civilization existing next to ours. Okay, if you say so. What do you make of that?
Well, I think using evidence, as I try to do, if you look up, there's especially a channel called Wise Up that I think has the best explanation for so-called ancient artifacts, that such as stones that appeared to have been poured or melted. His explanation is that they had technology similar to ours. If you took our civilization and covered it with a flood for a year, and this is salt water, it's got silt and currents, and mineralization happens over time, and that when the dust settles, when everything dries off and gets exposed to the air again, it solidifies, and all you're left with are the minerals. So it becomes rock. That's what petrification is. It's becoming rock. It's like if you have petrified wood, there's no wood left in it, but it takes the imprint of the wood that was there, because over time the minerals stayed, the liquids and organic parts rotted or evaporated, and you're left with a rock that looks for all the world like a piece of wood. In the same way, buildings like ours, concrete, refrigeration coils, rebar, wooden beams, all sorts of things, carved wooden statues, if you put them in an extreme environment of extreme cataclysm for a long time, enough for mineralization to take place, and what you're left with appears to be ancient tech far beyond our own, where they were melting rocks. For example, there's rocks that look like they were poured in a big wall. Well, if you made a wall of sandbags because the water's rising, maybe just a guess, and it doesn't do any good, and the water covers it over to a depth you couldn't have imagined, when it all settles, you're left with a wall that looks like it was made of poured rock. And so that's the Wise Up channel's thesis. And I think it is the Occam's razor explanation for ancient tech. That, yes, I believe that before the flood, that since we see these artifacts, that's not the right word, because that has to do with something being made, but in a way they are, because the original things were human crafted and very similar to what we have today, but they were inundated. And in the flood, which, like I explained before, there's all sorts of processes that go on over time, and that this would explain what we find in ancient buildings, in ancient, evidence of ancient technology. We found ancient batteries, what was it called? The Baghdad battery. People weren't stupid before the flood. And this is the idea that they were, that there's a steady march from simple to complex is evolution. There's social evolution, there's scientific evolution, but they believe that societies started out primitive, Stone Age cave dwellers. I mean, there are people living in caves today. So it doesn't say anything about a progression. Uniformitarianism is what evolution was based on, at least originally, that things just slowly evolve from simple to complex, and that this applies to technology as well in human society. And yet, when you apply something like the Wise Up channel does, where you say, look, if I built such and such structure and then put it under salt water and floods and all those sorts of things for a long enough time, that's what I would get as a result. And I think that's a pretty good explanation. But again, we're talking about known physical processes, known man-made technology, and things that could happen to make it look like something else. So that's what I would do. I'm still applying the same standard of empirical evidence. You look for, what could possibly result in this. And as long as you've got at least, two possible explanations, neither one of them can disprove the other, because you have to falsify, which brings us back to Mandela effect and the impossibility of falsification. So I just don't see why putting memory over empirical evidence is superior, and why anyone should get upset if you don't believe it.
Well, it's the same with your Bible research in terms of the standards that you're trying to achieve when you're doing historic documentation or historical evidence and their standards. So essentially your ideal is your primary source evidence. And in the case of some song lyrics, there's primary source evidence for those things. Same thing applies to TV shows that you think have got a different name. Sex in the City, Sex and the City. Well, you can do the same level of research, primary source research. Maybe go and find a script, whatever. The point is that you can do more than scratch the surface of your own memory when you start declaring that you've got a different title to a film or a different TV show name than you remember, which is really all you're declaring. It's different to what I remember. So yeah, primary source research. If you don't know what that is, then find out how to do it, and do it before you start making embarrassing declarations in regards to things changing that are in fact just a false memory.
Right. And this is like we started out saying about epistemology of, if you have one person who believes in empirical evidence and doing research, and that the evidence itself can't be changed magically by an unknown process, and then you have another person who believes it absolutely can, and that you can create reality with your thoughts and that sort of thing, those two people will never agree on anything of any value, because you have such very different foundational premises upon which you interpret the world, and how you determine what is true and false, which again is ironic, because if a person doesn't believe in absolutes, then what's the point of saying that something is absolutely true? If Mandela effect is absolutely true, it's kind of self-defeating, because you cannot prove anything. And that's the whole foundation of the belief system, is that nothing can be proved, but you must elevate your memory over all evidence to the contrary notwithstanding. You just throw that evidence away. And things that rely on evidence, such as science, such as I've gone on the series on Quantum Research Channel, the uniqueness of the Christian faith, that all goes away if you throw away empiricism. And that's probably the goal. If I were someone who is against the Bible or against real science that proves things that the majority does not want to be proved, that's one way you could do it. And it would be very effective, because it seems to be an organic movement. But we know these things aren't, and we know whether it's Earth shape, Earth age, the Bible, or anything else, there are going to be people with long-term plans that have, that this is what you can investigate if you believe in investigation, that have these things laid out generations in advance and know human psychology well enough to know what will convince us and what won't. When they do something like a direct frontal assault, such as, now in recent years, it's been the false flags of whether it's, the starts of World Wars I and II, 9/11, and et cetera. They're rubbing it in our faces because they're testing how well their indoctrination program has been working. And that is when they reach a critical mass of the population of the world who just believes the government no matter what, who believes the mainstream, the science books, the criticisms of everything that is a threat to their paradigm. Then they know there will come a point where they will simply hunt down the rebels. And this sort of thing, letting out a truth, can be one such test to expose those who haven't succumbed to the indoctrination, to find out who they are, why they escaped, and study us the way they do. This is probably, just guessing, why there are so many trolls in the Flat Earth channels, in Christian message boards. As years ago, I used to be in all the time, just crawling with trolls. I've seen people admit they are doing a study. They are studying us psychologically, not because they care about right and wrong, but because they want to know how they can fool us. And in my opinion, Mandela effect is just one of those avenues where they're saying, well, they can plant some doubts, and it's a known psychological fact that you can implant false memories into people. I'm not saying that everybody who believes in Mandela effect has had that happen to them, but I am saying that memory is as changeable as they think the printed pages are, and even more so. And it's a known fact, if you believe in fact, that the way the brain works, the memories aren't stored in just one location. And if part of a brain is destroyed or diseased or taken out through surgery, the rest of the brain will try to fill in that hole of a part of the memory with something that makes sense, in much the same way that your dreams, and in your dreams, you will try, your dream state, your subconscious will try to make sense of things that in reality make no sense whatsoever. And then you get into the question of what is reality? What is truth? And here again, you either believe in objectivity or you just believe, because there's no such thing as objectivity. And two people from the different sides of that will never agree on anything.
Right. I mean, there's an argument that there's no real benefit beyond a recognition of doing decent research to this particular subject. Like I say, there's only one person that seems to benefit from it. So you then have to ask the next question, well, there's plenty of people who cover the subject, and why would you want to place something at the centre of your life that lacks the power of nourishment? Eventually that's going to poison and destroy you. That's faithless lyrics. Anyway, Mandela gag. Anyway, the point is that if you're going to focus on something that doesn't really give you any inherent benefit at the end of it, what's the point? Whereas if you recognise that there might be more research needing doing, then that lends itself to the type of person that is often covering the Mandela effect. They often call themselves truth seekers. It's like, well, wouldn't that just imply that you should do bucket loads of research on the thing that you're now talking about in terms of your speculation about memory change and parallel universe change, or whatever it is they spin in terms of their explanation for it, usually very vague. But why not put the actual research at the paramount of your forefront of your whatever you're going to do to go forward with whatever it is you're mistaken about, rather than just spewing a load of nonsense about parallel universes? Is there maybe a conclusion that we can draw from this, Paula?
You mentioned truth seekers, and it's been my observation that if you claim to have found some truth, that people think you're arrogant, that, oh, nothing is knowable, you should seek truth all the time, but if you say you found it, there's something wrong with you, which is especially directed at Christians, it seems. Because we claim to know something that's true, we claim to have found who the real God is, and so forth. And they take that they're very offended by that because they don't believe that truth can be found. Well, then why are they seeking it? Why did you seek truth, but if you're not allowed to find it? It makes no sense. And so with Mandela or anything else, that this is a attack on evidence because, you can't even argue about it. How can I conclude this? But that...
I was just going to say, you summarised it earlier. You're like, well, if you reach the point where you're of the opinion that your memory could be changed, or you're in a false paradigm or a different paradigm, then essentially you've lost all objectivity. In other words, what's the point of being? You might as well give up. Well, at that point you go, well, who's that benefiting then? Certainly not you.
Right. Who but the powers that be benefit from people never knowing if anything is knowable.
Exactly.
So we can't hold them to account, and we can't remember the past in order to learn from it. And that makes us good little robots in the end.
Exactly. Can you direct my audience to where they can subscribe to your channel and maybe give another little hint at what you do there, and another plug to any other platforms maybe that you're on that you want people to go and look at, or just YouTube if it's just YouTube?
I am on YouTube, Bible Literalist, and I'm also noticing, just by the way, that in the past week, all of my comments on videos, even on my own channel, are starting to disappear after a day or two. And other people have been watching for me, to see if it isn't just me or my computer or my browser or anything. They are disappearing. And conspiratorial person I am, I believe that there are people employed by YouTube who have channel or able to comment on videos without having a channel. If you go to click on them, it says this channel doesn't exist. Something like that could be going on. So because of that, I'm not just on YouTube. I'm also on, let's see, I think I have a list here somewhere. I am on Library as Bible Literalist, or Truth Finder as opposed to Truth Seeker. I'm on DLive as Boat Rocker. I'm on BitChute as Bible Literalist, although the original name that I couldn't change after I said it was Bible Expositor. I'm on Steemit, Boat Rocker, and DTube, which and also what's the new one? Brighteon. And what did I call myself there? I don't seem to have that one on. Let me just look that up real quick. I think I used Relentless there. Anyway, Relentless, Boat Rocker. I had put on my videos, I've been putting all my aliases, which are not talk accounts, as some people try to say, because I'm not pretending to be different people. They're just different names I use in different places. So those are all the places I am. This is in the About tab on my YouTube channel while it lasts. But I will continue. I do a Tuesday show on my channel every week at 7 Eastern. On Bible topics almost exclusively, and then every other Tuesday at 2 Eastern on Quantum Eraser channel, he's had me doing a series on Christianity. So I do have a cosmology playlist if you're into that, and we'll keep going on YouTube as long as I can. So if I comment to you on YouTube and it disappears, it's not my fault.
Perfect. Well, with that, I'm going to say, first and foremost, a massive, huge, enormous thank you to you, Paula, Bible Literalist on YouTube, for joining me and discussing the Mandela Effect. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you very much. It was kind of you to have me on.
Thanks again. And of course, another massive, enormous, huge thank you to all of you who tuned in on the live stream for smashing the super chat, liking, commenting, sharing, subscribing, and all that good stuff. Be sure to check out nathanoakley.com and the Flat Earth Debate Forum to keep up to date with the community debate. I've been Nathan Oakley. Another massive thank you to Paula, otherwise known as Bible Literalist, and I'll see you all in the next video.
Oh, what a day! What a lovely day!